Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt, joined by United States Senator Tom Cotton. Good morning, Senator. How are you?
I'm great, Hugh. Good morning. It's good to be back on with you.
I would like to begin this morning with item from John Ellis's news items this morning, which is excerpted from the South China Morning Post. Quote, hypersonic weapons could be catastrophic for the most potent aircraft carrier group in the U.S. fleet, according to a war game simulation run by a team of military planners in China. Over 20 intense battles that are simulated, Chinese forces sank the USS Gerald Ford fleet, the fleet, not just the carrier, but the strike group, with a volley of 24 hypersonic anti-ship missiles in a simulation run on a mainstream war game software platform used by China's military. In the scenario, U.S. vessels are attacked after continuing to approach a China-claimed island in the South China Sea despite repeated warnings. A paper detailing the war game was published in May by the Chinese-language Journal of Test and Measurement Technology. It is the first time the results of a simulated hypersonic strike against a U.S. carrier group have been made public. You're on armed services, Senator. You've been on carriers. What do you think?
Well, first off, let me just say that there is no better morning newsletter than John Ellis's news items. I know you've begun to use that as chauffeur, as you say. It's what I read every morning as well. Some people ask me why I was first to the bell on the coronavirus 3 years ago, and the answer is that John Ellis's news items newsletter had started to include links in it as early as late December and early January. Excellent morning newsletter that provides this kind of vital reporting. This is pardon me, Hugh, the threat of Chinese missiles against U.S. aircraft carriers has been a growing concern for years now. It is a real risk. It's, of course, something that our Navy is aware of and has been planning for. The simplest defense against these things is that aircraft carriers aren't just sitting ducks. Lots of targets are hard to hit. The hardest target to hit, whether you're shooting an M4 rifle or shooting a hypersonic missile, is a target that's moving, much less putting in active defenses. But it's yet another reason why, first, we cannot cut our defense spending the way the Democrats are proposed, and we have to continue to advance a more cutting-edge ship technology for the Navy. Second, we also have to rapidly expand the footprint of our bases and our munition stockpiles in the Western Pacific, because there's no single silver bullet to deter China from going for the jugular in Taiwan or trying to seize more reefs in the South China Sea and build man-made islands that they can then militarize. It's going to be a combination of naval power, like carrier strike groups and fighters and bombers, and then also large missile stockpiles on our islands or in friendly nations in the Western Pacific that can hold all of those Chinese missile batteries at risk if they even think about challenging us. So this all gets back, though, of course, to having the military strength to be able to deter communist China from attacking us or our friends in the Western Pacific. And I just worry that Joe Biden and the Democrats are not up to that task.
Senator, do you believe that sinking an aircraft carrier means just unlimited war, not nuclear war, but unlimited conventional war, because it's 5,000 Americans?
Well, I don't think China would do that out of the blue, Hugh. I think we'd have some indicators and warning, but of course no American president could allow any American ship to be attacked by an adversary nation without significant retaliation. Again, the way to deter that, Hugh, though, is not to invest just in defensive mechanisms, try to protect our ships or protect our bases in places like Japan and Korea and Guam. It is to invest in more offensive strike capabilities. China has to know that we have the weapon stockpiles to reach out and touch Chinese mainland missile batteries in such a way that they'll be deterred from ever firing against us in the first place.
Now, Senator, I don't know that China understands this, because they released this war game for a reason, right? Nothing is accidental from the Chinese communists. So they released this in order to intimidate the United States. But our strategic ambiguity policy, which worked well for 40 years, hadn't worked well for 10 years, now has to be discarded, in my view. And I don't know if you agree with that, but I just think we've got to start laying out bright red lines, and not the kind that Barack Obama drew that you could erase, but I mean really bright red lines. What do you think?
No, I do agree that we need to change strategic ambiguity about Taiwan to strategic clarity. To fill in a little more details for your audience, Hugh, For decades, our policy about a Chinese invasion of Taiwan has been strategic ambiguity. We won't quite say what we would do. Would we come to their aid? Would we not come to their aid? The main reason, Hugh, for that strategic ambiguity going back to the 70s was that we knew the People's Liberation Army was not capable of that very complex operation. So there is no reason to yoke ourselves to what was then also not a fully fledged democratic government in Taiwan. Those conditions have changed. First off, Taiwan is a very robust democracy now. But second, the PLA is almost certainly capable of invading and annexing Taiwan and all of its economic might, to include the most cutting-edge semiconductor fabricating facilities in the world, absent American support for Taiwan. So the best way to deter that invasion from happening is to be clear about our intentions. I would go back to the interwar period, Hugh, for an analogy between World War One and World War Two. There are many occasions, not just in the 30s, in the remilitarization of the Rhineland in 1936 or the Munich Summit in 1938, but into the 20s when it was clear that if the Western nations like Great Britain and France and the United States had been clear with Germany well before the rise of Hitler, we could have deterred that war. That's why Churchill called it the unnecessary war. Any war with China would be another unnecessary war, but it would be the result of a failure of American will over multiple presidential administrations. We need to start drawing those red lines right now, though, and being clear with China with what we will and will not tolerate. I think that's going to be a central issue in the presidential campaign as well, Hugh, because Joe Biden is the opposite of strong and resolute towards communist China.
I actually feel bad for the president. He's infirm. Senator, I've been reading a lot about pre-World War One. The strategic ambiguity was embraced by all of the great powers in Europe prior to World War One. So nobody knew what anyone was going to do when the Balkan Serbians killed the Crown Prince of the Austria-Hungarian Empire. Nobody knew what would happen, and they didn't see it coming because they'd been ambiguous about their treaty. It's a nightmare. Let me switch subjects on you. Go ahead.
I think that's an apt analogy, Hugh. After Bismarck consolidated the German Empire in 1871, for 20 years he had this very complex web of balancing alliances and ententes and reinsurance agreements, all of which was designed to demonstrate to Germany's friends and rivals that Germany was no longer going to be an ambitious growing power, that it had grown satiated, if you will. But with Wilhelm's death, with the rise of his grandson, Wilhelm II, the dismissal of Bismarck, that restraint, that moderation was gone, and all of a sudden Germany became a much more aggressive power, became much more ambitious for its so-called place in the sun. And then, as you say, that combination of German ambition with Western hesitation, especially British hesitation, led to the circumstances in which Germany's ambition was not checked. And Germany thought that it could go for the jugular in France to help secure its position in the East, and you got the Great War. That's the last thing we want to happen in the Western Pacific. That's why we have to be clear about our willingness to deter China.
That's it. Everyone was guessing, and everyone guessed wrong, and 60 million people died. So, Senator, on the sequestration, not the disaster that came from the last showdown between Republicans and Democrats on a debt limit was sequestration, which included defense. I don't think Speaker McCarthy has put that. I think he's been very clear. We are not capping defense spending, but we are going to cap others. And I believe Leader McConnell has backed him up. Is that correct?
Yeah, Speaker McCarthy has been very clear from the beginning. He's not going to cut defense spending, and he's not going to agree to a cap on defense spending. And there's no reason we have what the Democrats call parity. They always say we have to have parity. If the defense budget grows by a certain amount, well, we have to spend the same thing on our domestic welfare programs, whatever it is their priorities are. That's not the way you make a budget, Hugh. You have to look at the fundamental responsibilities of government. The first responsibility is to protect your citizens. That's both from external threat to our military and internally with our police and law enforcement. And then you can move on to what you have the money left for. And we did not have parity in last year's spending agreement either. That concept is an artifact of the flawed budget agreement in 2011, which put in these 10 years of caps that also capped defense spending. Last year, we increased defense by a substantially higher amount than we increased domestic spending. That's what we should have done. That's what we should continue to do as well.
So, Senator, if I can switch again subjects to you to the upcoming Senator Scott got in the race over the weekend. Some of your colleagues have endorsed him. I think John Thune endorsed him, a couple other senators. Are you going to endorse in this race?
Hugh, I don't anticipate endorsing certainly anytime soon. I'm not surprised that some of my colleagues have endorsed Tim Scott. Tim is a fine Christian man. He's an outstanding senator and legislator. To know Tim Scott is to like Tim Scott. That's what 99 other senators understand, and I'm confident that million Americans will understand that about him as well. But for the time being, having opted not to be a candidate in the race, I don't plan to be a pundit or a strategist or a surrogate. I'll wish everyone well, and I'll be watching like Republican primary voters all across the country.
Senator Tom Cotton, always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you, Senator. Have a great week, and good luck in keeping President Biden focused and away from our defense spending, because, boy, we can't afford that. Thank you, Senator.